Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus Show. Live. We're glad to have you back with us on June 29th, Wednesday, Woke Wednesday. Got a great guest for you coming up. And as usually, we start with Bob telling us, could you be loved? You are loved. Take care of yourself, folks. And we're glad to see that you're back here watching us either right now or either looking at us as we're just, when you feel like it or live, whatever it is. But we're glad to see you. Okay, fantastic. Glad to see you, folks. Listen, we're glad to see you back here. And this is the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus Show, live, folks, trying to make things happen. Well, folks, I just want to let you know we've been through a very interesting week and week and a half. But you know what? Nothing really changes here except for we're going to keep doing what we usually do what we usually do by saying the same thing, staying on message, and also encouraging people to do what they need to do to make sure that the lives that they have, the lives that their loved ones have, and that their communities have continues to improve by you doing what you need to do and getting the right information. That's what we're here to provide. So you small businesses, you soon to be small businesses, you supporters of small businesses, we're getting ready to talk to you and stay on message. And the first thing is what we always do is we say, hey, have you been vaccinated? COVID is alive. It is still real. People are still getting it. So make sure that you're doing what you need to do to make sure you're taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, masking up and being, careful when you need to be careful in the right environments. And if you haven't gotten vaccinated, my advice is I think you ought to get vaccinated. Get those shots, get the third shot, unless your doctor tells you not to. I'm not trying to tell you what to do over your doctor, but if you have been cleared, I think you're better off, my opinion, getting it and getting the booster than not getting it. And everyone else in the family who you've gotten the correct information to get whatever vaccinations that you need. And why? Partially for reasons of love and selfishness. We want you to be here for yourself, for your families, and we want you to be here to do what you need to do, wherever you may lie on the philosophical discussions that we have here. So folks, just take care of yourselves. Be good to you and yours. Take care of yourselves. Pretty soon, this thing is going to be a terrible memory, and it can't happen soon enough for me, but at least some things have gotten better, and we'll take the wins where we can get them. So, folks, thank you. Well, welcome to Woke Wednesday. Yep, better to stay woke than sleep. You don't want to be waking up wondering what happened. You want to be the person who basically says, here's what we made happen. Here's what we're going to do. We're not going to sit around and just hope things turn out for the best. We need to be intentional and we need to be strategic in what we do. So I'm asking you, be strategic, be intentional, stay woke, and stay focused. And that's what we want to do here on the VADSBC show live. Yeah, live, baby. We're glad to have you here. And you know what? We have a fantastic guest who's coming. Oh, I've known this person for a while. And took a minute to get to know her because I kept missing her, but I know her now. We're going to talk about her later, okay? We're going to bring her on the show so all of you get to know her, okay? And that's what's important. I'm going to tell you about what we've been doing here. So last time I talked a little bit about how the primaries happened. We're talking locally here in Virginia, how our local CD, congressional district, Congress, at least for my district, won the primary race down by our thumbs up to him. All that went well. There are other things that are going on also. But since then, I guess the big news that's on the board that we're hearing a lot about locally here for small businesses and for people who are paying attention is definitely the hit like an earthquake, the turnover of Roe versus Wade and the attack on privacy for Americans. You notice I said Americans, because that's right. It's not just about what happened to people who actually are involved in having the healthcare procedures that women have for abortions when they're needed. it is also a question of privacy. And people need to understand that, because that also stems from the civil rights that you have, the modern civil rights triad, or the trinity, whatever you want to call it. But the basis from which all of our modern civil rights really come from are the acts that were put out there. So in Virginia, we heard the same thing that everyone had heard, and incredibly, the Roe versus Wade is no more, and different states are doing different things in response to what happened as a result of what the Supreme Court ruling was. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to explain that, but I can explain this part that I don't need to be a lawyer to explain. It is all about your civil rights. It is about your healthcare rights. It is about your rights to survive as a human being. And so to that extent, I'm going to go back talking about what I always talk about, because this all stems from that foundation of rights. And the foundation of rights that I want to talk about first is going to be, and stay with me, folks, as I play with my technology here, is to talk about that triad of rights that we have that formulated, as I said earlier, the modern civil rights. Okay, and I'm going to talk about this. It's going to happen. We're going to talk about voting rights. Okay, so I'm blinking it at you because we're going to get there. But the first thing I want to be able to do is to talk to you about initially, make sure I got them right here, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In the 1964 Civil Rights Act, or the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in short language, as I talk about, one of the three bases of our modern civil rights that we have, prohibited discrimination on the basis of color, prohibited on because of religion, sex, or national origin. Basically, this provision provided the Civil Rights Act forbade discrimination on the basis of sex as well as race in hiring and promoting. I like to keep it simple. That is what the Civil Rights Act brought us in 1964. But we did not stop there. And if we go back there, you'll see, because this is something you need to pay attention to. This is a Democrat. His name is LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. You recognize this guy over here, Martin Luther King. And then you recognize the protests that had gone on in this, and then how children were starting basically to move down the road of integration on the bus. That's why I really kind of included those pictures. I like to have a visual too. But what's important about those civil rights is basically you are having the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then you next had, people were all equal, but states control a lot on how voting rights get implemented. So what we had to do next in 1965, what Democrats did, was they had the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That act was signed into law on August the 6th, 1965. And again, like I said, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, it outlawed discriminatory practices, and it adopted in many southern states, as well as some northern states, things that they were doing after the Civil War, and things that they were doing like literacy tests as a prerequisite to voting, but basically voter suppression. People protested about it. John Lewis, you see a picture of him on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which we're trying to get renamed in his favor. And you also see a picture of Martin Luther King, and I think that's Ralph Abernathy, both of the Southern Christian Leadership Organization at that time. And that's my technology going crazy. Basically celebrating the passage of that bill. But that bill in 1965, as we'll talk about a little bit later as I continue to go, the heart of that was cut away in the 2013 court. And that is a pre-clearance provision, which has simply made that bill almost obsolete. But the good part of what happened in that decision is that the bill, the court left it open, saying, well, if you don't think it's true, then put it back in. And guess what? That is exactly what we're trying to do, put it back in. Now, let's go to the last third leg of this triad is the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It's basically, it expanded on other acts, and it prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, the rental, the financing of housing based on race, national origin, sex, and as later amended by handicap and type of family status. Title 8, the act also known as the Fair Housing Act of 1968. You see people out there protesting, all communities together. And again, you see LBJ signing that in the law. And you might ask, well, how does that make for the triad of rights? Why is this so important? The reason why it's so important is with the modern Civil Rights Act, basically we talk about in 1955, remember Plessy versus Ferguson back in the late 1800s, that basically endorsed separate and equal was okay and really got Jim Crow just doing whatever it wanted to do, and took like 100 years later before 1955 happened with the board, with Brown versus the Board of Education, which basically said separate is inherently unequal. But before they said separate was equal with Plessy versus Ferguson. But now in Brown versus Board of Education, that was knocked down. And many lawsuits needed to take place. But that was 55. So now you see the trail, right? Late 1800s, 1955, 1964, 1965, 1968. By the way, I was 8 years old then, and these things were not ancient history of these modern civil rights acts. I mean, I wasn't around in 55, but or the late 1800s, but my older sister was in 1955, and my older brothers and sisters were. So, but listen, these are things that are contemporary to our lifetimes, our parents' lifetimes, our family members. So people still living now understood what these things meant. So when you have major changes that attack these things, it's things that people fought and died for many generations to get it to where it is. We have been working very hard in this country since the Revolutionary War, into the Civil War that happened in this country, into the civil rights movement of this country, into the modern era of this country, to make sure these rights are guaranteed to all Americans. And from those rights, modern civil rights, you also have other things that came to be, like Roe versus Wade. That is a privacy right. That is a right for people, a civil right that they have, health care, a right they need to have to women and men need to have that right of privacy and to be able to do what they would like to do with their own health scenarios and with their own bodies, because it affects a lot of other things. But I won't get into that. I'm going to stay on this one thing right now. We could talk about this maybe a little later with other guests. But let's talk about first HR 4, I'm going to go to this one, HR 4, I apologize, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. This is where I want to tell people that you need to stay focused on this. This is the act that we wanted to get passed, that passed the Congress. And basically what it has is it modernizes the Voting Rights Act's formulation and determining discrimination in states and localities. It also had talked about declaring any changes that may happen in voting rules has to happen at least 180 days before an election. At least 180 days before an election, but more importantly is it needed to make sure that the right of preclearance was put back into place, and that the Department of Justice had to approve any of those changes that had to happen at least 180 days before an election. And as well as giving more government authority to send federal observers to observe and monitor jurisdictions for potential risk and discrimination at the polls and during voting. That is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, HR 4, that was passed in the 116th Congress. Now, the next one that came was HR 1, which was For the People Act, which actually expanded the rights of more rights for people to be able to have unfettered access to voting, which had things like automatic and same-day registration nationwide, 2 weeks of early voting in all states, banning the purging of voting rolls, restoring the full protection rights of the 1965 Voting Rights Act with the pre-clearance provision I spoke of earlier, finance reforms, election security, grants to help states replace voting machines and other things that they may need if those machines or equipment they were using was old, as well as processes for auditing and securing results. All these bills were passed in the Congress. So Congress passed these bills, but if you know anything about how our government works, you got an executive, you have a legislative, and you have a judicial. So, but within the legislative body, you also have the House of Representatives where it passed, but it also has to pass the Senate. And the Senate had a bill that they tried to pass, and I'll talk a little bit about this. And the Senate bill basically talks about the legislation that the Democrats had passed in the latest update as of January of 2022. This particular bill, which is Senate Bill 2747, the Freedom to Vote Act, in response to moderate Democrats and Republican critiques of the For the People Act, they came up with this act. And this act, basically, this legislation has national automatic voter registration, prohibition on voting rolls purging, and federal partisan gerrymandering. It also included improved election measures. It also strengthened the ethics standards for all three branches of government. For example, requiring presidents to disclose at least 10 years of their tax returns, and prohibiting members of Congress from using taxpayer dollars to settle sexual harassment acts. But also it curbed corporate influence in politics by forcing super PACs to close or disclose to their owners when requiring government contractors to let me get the last part right. It required a curb on corporate influence in politics by forcing super PACs to disclose their donors. Also, it required government contractors to disclose political spending, and also prohibiting coordination between candidates and super PACs, among other reforms. There was a lot of things in the Senate Act that did not pass. So it basically, you would need a super majority in order to break a filibuster. So basically, we're at a standstill with respect to that right now with Voting Rights Act, and that's why you need to elect more Democrats. So once again, what is our call to action? Our call to action is to register to vote, and our call to action is to make sure that we're also calling our Congress people and letting them know that we're familiar with HR 1, HR 4, Senate Bill 2747. And basically, these things are in place, are bills that are out there, but we don't have enough people elected in Congress who believe the same thing that will allow those bills to pass, because we need to make sure we protect our voting rights, because voting rights are foundational. They're fundamental to any democracy. They're the air that democracy breathes in order to make sure you have representation on a local, a state, and a federal level, people whom you believe the ideas that they're putting forth are good ideas, and you want to put them in elected office at whatever level there is. But if people are suppressing your votes on a state or local or federal level, that's a problem. And that's what we want to make sure that we're able to resolve that problem. So let's stay on point, folks. Let's stay on point with this. Now, there's some great tools out here that I talked about last time. There's the different activism apps that are out there. There's 5 calls. You can make your voice to action. So your voice heard, call to action. Make sure you download this app. And once you use this app and put it on your phone or on your desktop, you can basically, it gives you all the information that you need so that you're able to make calls to the people to let them know, and you don't have to remember all this stuff. This app literally has you put in your address and zip code, and it basically does the rest for you. Also, it's available on an Android with Google's, and it's also available on Apple, the 5 call apps too. So there you go. It is available. It is out there for you to download. So listen, folks, let's get out there and make sure all this stuff gets done. The apps are out there for you to use. All you need to do is jump into them, and we can make it happen. Now, I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our guest. Let me tell you who our guest is, and let me put her picture up on the screen so you can see her. A fantastic person. Let me put her up. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Kelly Hebron. She is the past chair of the Lee District Dems and the current chair of the Fairfax County Democratic Black Caucus. She's also an attorney, college professor, and a founder of her own organization, which is the From Prison to Paralegal Project, a program offering previously incarcerated prisoners, ex-offenders, and parolees training and career development. Now, that sounds like a great program. This is something we need to do to get people back to being tax-paying citizens and having opportunities once they've served their time and they're able to get back out here and vote again. Well, anyway, the program's core objective is to do what it sounds like: eliminate recidivism, which is a fancy word for saying going back to jail again, right? We don't want that. And we also want to improve their employment. You can't expect people to improve their lives if they can't get employment. How's that going to happen? So once they've served their time and paid their debt to society, they should be allowed to vote and to be able to get training and get a job and pay taxes. Makes sense to me, right? That's got to make sense. Really? Come on, just think about it for a minute. Think about it for a minute. I'm just going to let you marinate on that for a minute. That makes a whole lot of sense. It is a fantastic organization and a great idea that people are doing. But I'm not done talking about Kelly. Hold on a minute. Kelly also holds a BA in economics, a degree from the University of Maryland in Maryland Park, or College Park is what they call it. She's got her MA, which is a master's in public policy. And she also has a J.D., which is the Juris Doctorate for folk who don't know or not clued in. That is a law degree from the the Catholic University of America. So she's really done a whole lot out there. She's a current professor. She's an attorney. She started her own organizations. She's holding it down in civil participation in where she lives at here in Fairfax County. So she's really doing a lot of great things. But let me tell you a little more about her. She started her career at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau. And she also, Mrs. Hebron is, I don't call her Mrs. Hebron, so it sounds funny when I say that. But she also joined the Northern Virginia Community College, Alexandria, in Alexandria, Virginia in 2011, where she currently is still employed and focuses on imparting meaningful insight and teaching paralegal studies to some very good students who are very fortunate to have her. And finally, on a personal note, Kelly is a member of Alfred Street Baptist Church. She loves to be around her family, whom I've seen, a beautiful husband and children. And she spends her free time playing, hiking, reading, and traveling. So folks, without further ado, I am going to bring her into the stream. On 1, 2, 3, Kelly, good to have you. Whoa.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Fantastic. You've done a whole lot. It's great having you on the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus Show live, and we are here to learn a little bit about you. So I've told folks something, but as I do at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Go ahead. Tell us about Kelly Hebron.
Wow. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure just listening and hear all the information. I'm going to make sure I share that activism app, Mark. I'm going to make sure I spread it far and wide about the 5calls.org.
Yes.
So that'll be good information. Wow. You said tell them about Kelly Hebron.
Yes.
I'm here to make a change. I don't want to leave this earth without knowing I left an impact somehow better than when I came, and to be a good example for my girls. That's my mission right now. That's my mission in life. Yeah.
That's a good mission.
All right, man. Well, what do you want? Where do I start?
I'm going to ask you to kind of just start from the beginning. Maybe you can tell us how you came to be involved in politics, why you maybe decided to become an attorney, and a little bit about just your past history and what you're currently doing. I'm going to let you just sort of choose. I can pepper you with a bunch of questions. That's good enough to start with.
Well, I start no, seriously. I started always wanted to be an attorney. I started, gosh, when I was probably like 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Philadelphia, which even back then was very Quaker, very progressive, and a lot of role models, a lot of good role models, and I think that's key in life. And so from my childhood on,
Philly?
What's that?
You came from Pennsylvania.
I really did. I really did. From the mean streets of Philadelphia.
Okay, so that's a little news that people may not have known before. Go ahead, keep going.
Born and raised, I had the pleasure of growing up in Zion Baptist Church, which is the Leon H. Sullivan. And so when you grow up with that type of emphasis, Leon Sullivan was the one who was responsible for the Sullivan principles.
In South Africa, right?
Yeah, and he helped, those Sullivan principles helped to end apartheid in South Africa. And growing up, I remember him talking. I remember all the trips back and forth he was taking to South Africa. And that leaves an impression. And that also leaves not just an impression of what one voice can do, but also leaves an impression of service to the community and the importance and our obligation to really give back as much as we are receiving, especially when we are receiving so much.
Yes, he left an impression on you, obviously, right? To become an attorney.
He really did. He married my parents, baptized almost everybody in our family, including me. So, we really grew up with the Lion of Zion, as they used to call him. And so,
did you? Let me stop you for a second, because now you got me curious, because this is a little tidbit that jumps into something else. Did you ever have a chance to meet Randall Robinson with Trans Africa? I guess those guys sort of worked together with that whole thing with freeing Nelson Mandela. Does that have any connection into how you grew up? And
not really. I mean, yeah, kind of. I mean, he had been to Zion. He had been a guest speaker, but I did not. I may have and just don't remember. What I do remember is the sense of self-empowerment. One of the main principles was a sense of economic self-empowerment, and that left an impact. My great uncle, I had to think about it. My great uncle was one of the first business owners in Reverend Sullivan's first economic development project, which was called Progress Plaza in Philadelphia. And so he owned a bookstore. And I remember going to the bookstore, and he always gave me a book. And I'm still a reader to this day. He would give me a book. I was so excited because it was a treat. And we got to go down there, and I learned early on, it was all, about the empowerment, that self-empowerment. And that was really a big theme. And I think about now in my childhood and early part of my life, Progress Plaza was the first economic development project of Reverend Sullivan.
Oh, really?
All Black-owned businesses in the entire plaza.
Wow.
It changed. It raised folks to the next class, to a middle class. And they were able to provide for their family, where before, without that opportunity, they may not have. Because right then, I can tell you, my grandfather, he was working at the warehouse, at Campbell's Warehouse, across the bridge in South Jersey. And what that did was two things. He opened up Progress Plaza, and he opened up Opportunity Industrialization Center. I didn't expect to get into this history lesson. However,
this is good, right?
The other aspect of it, he created self-empowerment by opening up opportunity for Black entrepreneurs, right? But he also opened up a pathway for management jobs and much more professional jobs for Black folks in Philadelphia. And back then, it was here's a pathway, and he really went into the community. He went in, he gave people not just opportunities to get access to these jobs and ways of, but he also prepared them. He gave training, he gave classes, etiquette class. He gave everything they would need to succeed. And that was the amazing thing about the OIC Operation Industrial Center, I think it was. So when you grow up hearing these things and hearing it, preaching it, and seeing it does become part of your psyche. It becomes part of your consciousness. And for me,
go ahead.
And for me, I can't imagine any other way of life, because that's the only life I've known.
Well, you grew up in a city that is known. I mean, it was the first really where the formation of the United States took place in Philadelphia, right? Washington,
Yep.
D.C. was not built yet. Congress and everything after the Revolutionary War, everything was done in Philadelphia. You've got, if people have not had a chance, you can probably tell them the things that you find in Philadelphia having to do with your civil rights, your constitutional rights, the Liberty Bell, all of that. If folks have not gone there, I mean, because what you're talking about now still exists in the city of Philadelphia, what the Reverend Sullivan put together, as well as all that great U.S. constitutional voting rights, civil rights, history rights we fought hard for as Americans, many generations through many wars. The American Revolutionary War, I mean, the Civil War, World War I, II, III. I mean, not three, but hopefully not, right? And all the other Vietnam Wars, Korean Wars, and all the things that this country and people from all communities have shed blood to protect the rights that we have as Americans. And and to think that here we are now having one of our own branches of government taking away rights from Americans, which is, but guess what? We've been through this battle before. We can definitely win it again. So tell me more about what you do. See, all these little nuggets come out. I just try to jump on them. Tell us more about what you do.
Task force, always going to be a lawyer, right?
Yeah. For the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. Tell me.
Yeah, so I went into politics. Actually, I worked on campaigns in Philadelphia growing up. In high school, I was volunteering. Always did. I never thought I would necessarily run for office or what type of involvement would extend into my adulthood. But you know, the best laid plans, right? You just never know what's really going to come ahead. And I think for me, getting involved with politics was a way of me having my voice heard. I think you get to a point, most of us do at some point, some sooner than others, where we no longer want to be just a vote, but we want to be a voice and we want to be at the table. And again, Shirley Chisholm, you know, you can't talk about politics, Black women involved in politics, and not acknowledge the pioneers. And one of the things I think was most amazing is the time frame and what Shirley Chisholm accomplished and what she was doing. And she was fighting the same fight that we're still fighting today: voting rights, abortion, and the list goes on. And I think one of the things that I found and that attracted me is that if we don't come to the table, we don't have a space, we don't have a voice, and then someone else will be talking for us. And I just couldn't do it anymore. After 16, actually before 16, I did a program called Emerge Virginia. And this is before the 16 election. And we had no idea what was coming down the aisle. And well, now we're living the results of 2016.
Yeah.
So I can't stop now being involved.
Right.
It's more important now than ever that all of us come to the table, because if we don't, someone else will speak for us.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just important that not just our vote be counted, but our voice be heard. And you know, I think for too long we have accepted what is really unacceptable. You know, whether it's we're talking about guns on the street. I won't even get into what it looks like in the neighborhood around my old church, Zion Baptist. It's like driving through some kind of craziness now. But for so long, that's been accepted as the norm. And I think what we're seeing, or at least what I hope we're seeing, and I hope we can do, is change the tide so that we're now looking at what life looks like with gun control that affects everybody. Because it didn't really matter until it started to affect everyone. And so long, again, we've accepted what's been unacceptable. And I just think that whether it's gun control, voting rights, the suppression of voting rights is getting broader. Folks are getting concerned. But I also think a couple other things. More people are getting involved. And I think that's critical.
Yes.
we understand that when we have voices raised collectively, the echo goes far. And as more people get involved, and as they see more people showing up at the meetings, showing up at the town halls, showing up at the board meetings, they pay attention, they take note. When they see someone tweet, they take note.
Yes.
And so I would say my message to anyone listening, my plea to anyone listening, your voice and your vote matters. Vote and let them hear you. Our voice should matter, and it does, but they need to hear it. They need to hear it.
Well, they can't hear you if you're not registered to vote. So I know you're telling people to register to vote, to
Absolutely.
Get out there and to learn what's going on and have your call to action, which you said is get out there and vote and make sure that we don't have our voting rights abridged in any way. I mean, that is what it's all about, people doing those
Mark,
things.
Yeah, do more than vote. Show up to these meetings. Do more than vote. Show up to the meetings.
Well,
if you have a board meeting, a board of supervisors meeting, show up. If you have a town hall meeting, show up. If you have a commission meeting, show up. A school board meeting, show up. If we don't show up, they think no one's listening. They think no one's watching.
Showing up is what, 50% of the battle, they said, just being there. If you can just show up, if nothing else, it makes a difference. As you hear other people say, I think I heard Al Sharpton say, when I'm too old and I can't move, I'll just pull up a chair and just get in the way. I can't march. I'm going to do something. I'm going to at least show up and sit down. So my thing to you, though, you brought up a lot of different things. And I want to talk a little bit more specifically about the Black Caucus here in Fairfax County, Virginia. Fairfax. So tell me, how has that been going? You want to give us a little insight to that and what people who may be interested in working with the Fairfax County Democratic Committee, Black Caucus, what do they need to do in order to be a part of that organization within the county?
They need to show up.
FCDC. They need to show up, right?
For that meeting. They do. I mean, really, what we try to make it as simple as possible. Our meeting is always the fourth Sunday of every month, with the exception
of Sunday of every month. Okay.
From 7 to 8 p.m. Fourth Sunday of every month from 7 to 8 p.m.
Okay.
And should I say that one more time for the people in the back?
One more time.
Fourth Sunday, fourth Sunday from 7 to 8 p.m. every month.
Where can they find the information about the Black Caucus?
FairfaxBlackCaucus.org.
FairfaxBlackCaucus.org, and it's listed underneath the Fairfax County Democratic Committee website too, right?
Yes, that's correct. We are a caucus under the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. Absolutely. Thanks. I forgot to mention that. So please,
you're the chair.
yes. Anyone who wants to join, listen, supporters and allies are always welcome.
Right.
The idea is that we are intended to provide a collective voice for everyone to hear from the caucus, from the Black Caucus.
Okay. Yeah. And people can find you on, are you on all the platforms from Twitter to Facebook to?
We are on Facebook.
Okay.
So look us up on Facebook, follow us, and get involved. We are going to be posting some more information soon on our website, on our Facebook. If you sign up on Facebook, you can start receiving our emails.
Okay. You want Instagram?
Yeah, and we're going to be sending out ways for people to get involved. Whether it's, as you said, the 5calls.org as a easy lift, as a way to make phone calls.
Right.
But we are going to make sure we don't lose the November election. We are going to be phone banking, sending postcards, canvassing, traveling, carpooling down to Virginia Beach if we have to keep Lauria in Congress, and do what we have to do to make sure that the people who are in office are representing our interests. And Mark, there is something I wanted to say about the Roe versus Wade, as much as this is in the Voting Rights Act and everything else.
Yeah,
all elections matter. All politics are local, right? We hear that all the time, and all elections matter. But rest assured that Roe versus Wade has a great impact on our community.
Locally.
We're already facing mortality,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I had statistics somewhere, I put it down, but even before this, Black women suffered greater fatality in childbirth than any other demographic.
Mm-hmm.
And to take away that right is absolutely disproportionately affecting our community than any other community. And it shows in because of what happened in 2016. We have the court that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite classes when I was in grad school, so I did a joint degree program. So I studied law and policy at the same time. And one of my favorite classes was the courts and Congress.
Okay.
And that was interesting about the balance and the battles historically between courts and Congress and what is past and prelude. And we're seeing it play out again today. And as you said, we've been here before.
We've been here before. And I think when the Democratic Party is trying to message to people how these things affect them locally, I want to go back to what you were saying about the policy piece. If people don't have health care, how are they going to have healthy babies? How are they going to be healthy themselves when you have people on the other side of the fence, let's be clear, the Republicans, who are denying health care to their own citizens and putting the affordable health care into action, but at the same time saying with the Republican heavily leaning one way Supreme Court are saying, hey, you have to have these babies. Okay, how are we going to pay for this? Who's going to take care of us? How are they going to have healthy babies if they don't have health care? And I think I heard what Stacey, who's running for governorship down in Georgia, talking about this very thing. Well, this makes no sense. So but this again is not a Democrat or Republican thing. Like I always tell people, this is an American thing. Everybody needs good, safe health care.
Yes,
and everybody deserves the right to have decisions over their own body and decisions to have free and unfettered access to the polls. But I'm throwing it back at you. You kind of got me started again. Doesn't take much.
I mean, Mark, I'm sitting here. Yeah, I am absolutely in agreement. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we can do, that we need to be prepared, is to fight for our Congress come November. We need
Absolutely.
to. If you're not in a seat or have a Congress or a representative, that seat is not considered a flip seat.
Mm-hmm.
Then go help someone who is.
Go help someone else.
Yes, because we need everyone on deck. When we're dealing with issues such as healthcare, these are fundamental rights. Gun rights. I'm having these conversations. My daughters are getting older. I'm having these much more deep conversations with them. Right. What's happening, going on in current stage. We were actually watching the recap of the hearings from yesterday. And my 12-year-old asked me, why can't we just get rid of guns totally? And I paused. I was like, I really wish it was that simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. We have so many who want to resist any need for guns. Now, is it built into the Constitution? Absolutely. But, the thing, as I was explaining to her, is that we have to remember that the founders, each day, everyone, I think it was Abraham Lincoln, can't believe I'm quoting him, but I think it was him who said, I like to think I'm smarter today than I was yesterday. I think he said something along that line.
I think that's called learning.
Right.
Exactly.
And they could not have imagined
mm-hmm.
assault rifles. The AR was the AR-57 or whatever those things are called. They could not have imagined the assault rifles being used, let alone being used on children.
Yeah.
As part of our constitutional right.
No.
Unfortunately, and I know you know this, I was at the mall.
Mm-hmm.
When that lockdown happened. I was actually there in the middle of the lockdown.
Really?
And the other week, and had to barricade in place at some random store. And one of the things that the takeaway, I think, is at least for me, should not be that your right to bear arms should infringe on my right to walk at the mall.
Right.
And I think that we have lost so much focus on what is our rights in terms of what are reasonable, what is intentional, and I think more importantly, what makes sense. It has become so partisan, so Democratic, so Republican that no one is going for not. I'm saying not Democrat or Republicans. I'm saying we're not able to have conversation about what makes sense in gun laws.
Well, I think part of that is people steal the narrative and they sort of dominate it. And you hear people say, well, I'm a Second Amendment rights supporter. Well, guess what? I'm a supporter of all those amendments. The Second Amendment is just one.
Right.
So if you're simply saying, I just support the Second Amendment, all the rest of the amendments, which are equally as important, work together in a comprehensive way to create balance, which is the reason why we have them in the design of our government as separate equal powers, so you can have these great deliberative bodies, not so you can basically find a silo and say, well, I'm in the Second Amendment silo, everything else doesn't matter, I'm just in the Roe versus Wade tear it down silo, and nothing else is important. We're a country of different people, different thoughts. We're not a religion. We're not a theocracy, right?
Right.
Not an autocracy. So, you're a professor in this area. And so what do you, and this is a good little segue into what are you teaching your students at Northern Virginia Community College in Alexandria? What is your role there? What do you do?
I teach in the Paralegal Studies program. So we teach students to become paralegals.
Right.
Sometimes they go into paralegal, sometimes they go into law school, sometimes they go into other areas like business.
Okay.
So we have a variety of pathways, but the program itself is a program to prepare you for a career in paralegal studies.
Okay. Well, have you done that the whole time? Did you just do the paralegal piece, or through your career there working at the community college?
Oh, no. I've worked at legal aid, and then I had my own law practice for a good 15 years.
Okay.
Real estate and practice law.
Okay.
The prison paralegal came about really after I saw so many students come through that had criminal records. And the paralegal program just made sense because they spent so much time studying the law while they were incarcerated.
Right.
And now they were looking for ways to advance. I've had a student that was worked closely with me that went on to University of Penn after coming out of prison, went to the paralegal program, went to Penn, and ultimately, I think, got an MBA.
Okay, fantastic.
So, I think that the idea is that we spend, even from a purely, what I found is very appealing to most sides of this whole reentry is the economics.
Okay.
When you look at the cost for incarceration versus the cost for training, the return on investment is no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
It's cheaper to train than to continue. And we're not even getting into the privatization of the prisons and the corruption that comes with the privatization of prisons. And so,
when you look at the cost of education too,
right, and
versus the other, it's a no-brainer, even with the crazy cost it is now.
Right. And there's again, there's so many different ways. Someone who, and also there's this thing that once you have paid your debt to society, why should it be with you? Nowhere else are you able to make a mistake and it carries you through the rest of your life like that criminal record. And as you're just talking about gun rights and voting rights, you lose all of this stuff. And that's, and sometimes I guess maybe I stumble over my words, but I think that everyone should have their rights protected, right? And everyone should have access to once they've paid their debt to society. Otherwise, why are we letting them out?
Exactly. If that's the case, well, I know that question was.
I don't understand, right? Why let them out if you think they're still a threat? So I just think that, it really does come down to so many different, again, it comes down to two things. economics, it's a lot cheaper to train than to remain incarcerated.
Right.
I also think that if you are educated, it improves your self-confidence and your self-esteem. And coming out some of the situations, we already know that there's more brown and black folks in jail than anyone else.
Yes.
Statistics, study after study covers that.
Right.
And that's systemic. It's systemic. You know, we're not even going to talk about.
Well, if you don't have balance in the other parts of your government and other parts of what's happening in the country, and you have these systemic results, and the data bears this out. The reason why they were trying to get changes like in the George Floyd Police Reform Act and the Voting Rights Act, these statistics, it's not just like we think this is a good idea. No, here's example after example after example. If you deploy these new tactics and techniques, we can make some progress in this area.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that one of the things we want to think about also is not just the guns, not just voting rights, not just abortion, education.
Education.
It all starts with education. And if we can get our education system together, if we can get wraparound services for the students that need them in these schools. Everyone wants to talk about repairing schools. We get distracted, I think, talking about CRT. I think if we spend more time focusing about putting community services, wraparound services to the schools that need them, we can break some cycles. And we can then focus on looking at decline in incarceration, looking at decline in violent crime. We can look at decline in violent crime, and a decline in so many strains on our services that we have right now.
Well,
but it starts with education and providing the mental health and the community wraparound services that are needed. So many of our children are going through trauma. So many of us have been through trauma. We're not even going to talk. Mark, there's so many problems that we can't even get into that are all interconnected.
They are interconnected.
Before we wrap up, one thing I do want to say is that the pandemic pulled a curtain on so many different things.
Absolutely.
And the pandemic also exacerbated a lot of things.
Healthcare was one of them.
That's where I was going with this. And mental health is important.
And mental health. Exactly.
And again, circling back, whether wait, where am I going with this? Okay, we got voting rights, we got gun rights, and immigration law, all these different things. But I do think that mental health and healthcare is critical. Is critical to everything else that we're doing right now. If we're going to restrict women's right to have an abortion, we need some strong healthcare, and we need good mental health, because they're all related.
And you need, and I really want to start talking about this more, is really the cost of education and having that education available. I mean, so you're a teacher, you're out there teaching these young minds and older minds at a collegiate level, plus you have children. So I know you understand the value in people having basic analysis skills so that they can understand in writing or when they're seeing things on the internet or TV and be able to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. What's real and what's BS, okay? Those analysis skills. Maybe you want to talk to that being an attorney a little bit and a small business person.
Well, I think one of the things, one of the things I did a lot of, particularly in private practice, as well as at Legal Aid, I represented abused and neglected children, and I represented juveniles, and I represented them in some of the worst locations in the area. And I think that the biggest takeaway from that is that if you're talking about analysis, is that you have to really be able to start understanding not just treat the symptoms, but the underlying causes.
Right.
And if we just keep putting a Band-Aid, we're not solving anything. We're leaving it, we're kicking it down the road for the next generation.
Okay.
That's what I want to see change. So when you say, what am I doing? These are reasons why I stay engaged, because I see so many things and I just don't understand how we can not change it for the next generation.
Well, you just set me up for what I do with every guest who comes onto the show. If you've been watching this #1 rated show on the internet,
I believe
ask all guests at the end of the show, if you were queen or king for a day, you had that magic wand or scepter, and you could use it, what would you change?
You know, I knew you were going to ask me that question. I keep changing my answer. Knowing me, I probably say I would want the power to change everything. But if I had to change one thing,
Now, that's the first time I heard that. That's a good answer. You can keep using it, right? But go ahead.
yeah, I think I would change everything. But I think I would start. I think everything begins and ends with education.
Mm-hmm.
Because education gives you training for a job.
Right.
It also gives you good confidence, gives you critical thinking, analytical, people skills.
Mm-hmm.
So much comes from a solid education.
Yeah.
And I think that I would really fix our education system in conjunction with wraparound services so that everyone's getting the support they need to succeed.
So basically, you make sure that the government is actually providing education K through undergrad as far as you could go. You think it's in the interest for the, and I agree with this, by the way. I think it's in our interest to educate the populace. And I'm not saying just college. If someone needs to get a certification, whatever their talent leads to them, but if it's going to help them become a tax-paying citizen and not coming in anyone else's houses, taking their stuff, but contributing to society, why is that not a good investment?
Mark,
right?
Yeah, I hear you, Mark. I hear you, and those are good in theories. We have to think about what makes sense from a financial perspective. I will never say, because we have to think what makes sense. Just like I said, it's cheaper to train than it is to keep them incarcerated.
To educate them, right?
Exactly. And one of the things that's most frustrating is that it's a balance to strike. And let's be real. I'm very realistic. Let's be real. If you've paid for college, and I've heard this so many times, are also like, why do I have to go to jail to get it for free?
You don't get it for free in jail.
Well, no, I'm saying that's the kind of argument for it.
Okay, some places they do, huh?
Yes. And so I think that we have to start thinking about ways, and we have to think differently and creatively about finding ways, because it's always comes down to money. How are we going to fund something? And so when you say, I said, I will wave that magic wand where I don't worry about money and make it a perfect education system, because that's what most of the discussion is about, because where we spend our money determines our priority. And I think that's the big deal. And so when you hear about a lot of these things, like, are we going to fund? Like, I benefited from arts in school. Right. But that was different than, my God, we need STEM. We need everything right now.
I don't think here in the United States, though, I don't think it's a question of money. I think it's merely a question of political will. I think we have the resources to educate everyone.
We need to better manage our resources. Absolutely.
We need to better make sure we allocate them in the right places so those things are taken care of.
You are absolutely right. You have to manage those resources, and that's usually that's why I was saying it's a magic wand to make our education system perfect. I mean, I'm just thinking about all the things that we talk about. Affordable housing. Right. If people can't afford to live here, pretty soon we're not going to have anyone able to work here.
Well, you're talking about all those three basic things that happen in civil rights: the Fair Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. Why are these things important? And then implied in the Civil Rights Act is...
Yeah, I went there. We need to think about like tax credits. Let's talk about real estate tax credits.
Exactly.
We need to allocate our resources. And where we spend our money really depends what is our priority. Don't get me started, Mark. Do not
I want to get you started, because I know if I get you started, I can get you back, because you can't possibly finish all this in one conversation.
We need to think about where we're spending our money. But we can definitely do some things with, like I said, I think everything starts and ends with education. How about that?
It does. And you know what? I have got to have you back, because you do a fantastic job, Kelly. And I'm so proud of the work that you're doing out there in the county, and people are continuing to learn to get better. So stay with us. stay with us, and I'm going to try to make sure my technology is working. I thought I had it right on time there, but oh, there it is. That is my segment to say it's time to leave. And thank you, Kelly, for being on. Kelly Hebron being on the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus Show live. And we're going to have you back again. Can I get you back?
Sure, absolutely, my pleasure.
We'll see you next time, Kelly.
Take care.
Don't let them fool you.